actually. Yeah, this might work, yeah. Okay. All right, so I'm wearing a different hat for this talk. Does it suit me? No, okay. Never mind. Of course, you're all going to look at my hat now. I'm going to talk about essentially this report. Many of you picked it up that was outside. You've had links to the free download, and I will point you to the website where you can download it. Essentially, this represents the Nepal launch of the Foresight report of something called the Global Panel on Agriculture and Food Systems for Nutrition. The Global Panel was established in 2012 as part of the Nutrition for Growth activity in London. It's a sister initiative to the Global Nutrition Report that many of you know about and have read. And it's a global panel of experts acting in their own personal capacity, but from quite senior positions around the world, including this year's World Food Prize laureate, Akin Adesina, several heads of UN agencies, but an eminent set of individuals who have all taken it upon themselves to be ambassadors for attention to the linkages between agriculture and health and nutrition by a focus on improved food systems and diets. And before going any further, I would just like to give the word to the co-chair of the panel, John Kufuor, former president of Ghana.
My greetings to you all. My name is John Ejikum Kufuor, former president of the Republic of Ghana. It is my pleasure to be able to address you at this important forum, and I welcome this opportunity to bring my message to such a committed research community. The ANH Academy Week and Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Nutrition Symposium is not only a platform for sharing what we know about food systems, nutrition, and health. It also offers us the opportunity to connect country leaders with passionate advocates of evidence-based policy for health and nutrition. What we have in common is the aspiration to create a stronger future to drive development in our societies. As the president of Ghana, I often found myself making decisions informed by the rich history of our past, the opportunities of the present, and the potential for the future of our citizens. For me, decisions are fundamentally based on one simple question: what best supports development? As co-chair of the Global Panel, I ask myself this same question. I've come to believe that what drives development, innovation, and progress is people, and we cannot grow as nations if we are not providing adequate nutrition for all. As the Global Panel's Foresight report, Food Systems and Diets Facing the Challenges of the 21st Century shows, food systems are failing to deliver high-quality diets. The cost of malnutrition will continue to impact the health and wealth of our societies and will hold us back from achieving our full potential. But what this report makes clear is that we have the chance to change this trend now. We must rethink how we grow, produce, process, market, and prepare food to ensure that people are well nourished. Today, I'm here to call for a stronger alignment of evidence-based research with implementable policies and investments. We need to strengthen collective efforts for a closer dialogue between the research community, governments, and the private sector on food systems. That is why I'm glad to hear that the ANH Academy Week and Nutrition Innovation Lab Symposium is encouraging this process. Your support, commitment, and innovation in producing robust evidence is crucial to allow us to make informed policy actions. The Global Panel, which I co-chair with Sir John Beddington, former UK's Chief Scientific Advisor, promotes dialogue with governments in Africa and South Asia, advocating the advantages of investing in research and policies that enhance nutrition. The panel has produced a wide range of policy and technical briefs, most recently on food environments and consumer behavior. As global panel events around the world show, governments are increasingly receptive to these messages and have the opportunity to make their contribution to the decade of action on nutrition and sustainable development goals. But to achieve this ambitious goal, we need the support of all of you here, particularly from the younger researchers who have the power to reposition research to deliver high-quality diets. We also need to encourage intersectoral research, particularly in regions where data are insufficient to inform policies. Ultimately, we need the evidence to resonate with policy leaders. Initiatives such as the ANH Academy and Nutrition Innovation Lab have a pivotal role to play in facilitating learning and sharing among researchers from diverse disciplines and research initiatives, and also with policymakers from food, agriculture, and nutrition sectors. In South Asia, panel member Professor Srinath Reddy is now leading a conversation with senior decision makers from Nepal, Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, and Maldives to foster a new leadership initiative. We hope Sapling will sit alongside this twin initiative, the African Leaders for Nutrition, which I champion alongside the President of the African Development Bank, Dr. Akiwumi Adesina. Together, we encourage heads of state, finance ministers, and business leaders to increase investments in nutrition in Africa. These initiatives are the testimony that the momentum on nutrition is high. Collectively, we can achieve a great impact during the decade of action on nutrition and help achieve targets set out in the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you for your kind attention.
So, as you heard, very high level, very global attention to the issues that link all of the topics that we've been talking about today. This report is a forward-looking report. It's trying to understand where are we now, what is business as usual, and what will be the situation if business as usual continues. Many people contributed to this, a great number. Some of them are in the room, like Jeff Wagi, Giacomo Zanello, Rachel Lambert, Alan Dangur, and others, many, many others. But the point is, what this represents is a growing consensus about the importance of focusing not just on individual nutrients or commodities, but on whole diets. Many improvements going on globally in the world in terms of human well-being and national economic growth. Poverty reduction happening dramatically. Child and maternal mortality declining in quite dramatic turns over the last 20, 30 years. Illiteracy, yes, still stubborn in many areas, but still going down very quickly. The number of famine deaths has been declining quite steeply until quite recently. Many communicable diseases have been falling. So the picture of global development is quite strong, and we have many success stories to build on and learn about. The problem is that malnutrition is an outlier. And this has to resonate much more widely than people have given it credit for in the past. Malnutrition in all its forms continues to increase. Let that sink in, right? That's why we're here. There is a major problem that is running counter, and despite many of the other successes in human well-being. We know the numbers are just a small part of what's going on. We've heard about all the 42 million children. The lower part is just the children, already overweight and obese, the stunting still in the 150 million range, 50 million plus children wasted. But there's also many hundreds of millions of adults who are included in those malnutrition numbers. And the problem is that right now, 30%, if you add up all of these and account for overlap, something like 30% of the world's entire population suffers one form or other of malnutrition, and that by 2030 could rise to 50%. 50% of the entire planet, 1 in 2, once you factor in continuing high levels of micronutrient deficiencies and the astonishing growth of overweight and obesity. Globally, just on that issue, we're looking at a tripling of overweight and obese just adults. We're seeing the rise among children. In China, very large increase projected. In Nigeria, diet-related chronic non-communicable diseases, including diabetes, likely to double. Next door, Bangladesh, more people with diabetes than larger countries like Mexico and Indonesia. This is a big, big problem, and Tamid mentioned that in relation to Bangladesh. And of course, even Nepal is not immune to this. We're seeing the rise, particularly in adult women, of overweight and obesity quite significantly. It's a problem. And just to re-emphasize that this has then the link to health, probability of dying from any form of cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, those that are very closely related to dietary problems. Some of the largest rates here circled are in low-income countries like Cote d'Ivoire, Sierra Leone, Guyana, Sudan, Afghanistan. This isn't a rich country's problem. It's a planetary problem. And the implications for low-income countries in terms of health budgets, lost productivity, rising mortality, presumably, down the road is quite significant. Which, of course, then brings us to diets and food systems. It's only recently that the penny has finally dropped, that the global burden of disease, as measured in terms of disability-adjusted life years, so the global burden of all diseases is now driven, the number one risk factor are dietary-related risks. What we're eating or not eating is killing us or impairing us. Our diets are hugely important now to the global health situation or burden of disease. And that means eating too much of some things, too little of many other things. The balance matters. And the quality of that diet now means not just sufficiency, it's got to mean adequacy in all forms, quantity, quality, diversity, many of the things that we've been talking about. But we have to understand that many of the metrics we've been talking about only capture small pieces of the puzzle. This is a World Bank document, came out last year, an investment framework for nutrition. That's where this quote is coming from. The World Bank is explicitly saying quality of diet has to be the focus, one of the key foci of our tackling of malnutrition. Why is that? All right, if we don't do much, we can't assume things will automatically improve or change with income, right? So these are diagrams coming from the Foresight report. Our diets don't necessarily improve dramatically over time. That's over a couple of decades period. Some things do improve, right? I mean, there has been improvement over that 20-odd year period, almost 25-year period, across the various sub-regions, geographies of the world in terms of fruits and nuts and seeds. You know, we're seeing some gains here. We're seeing some improvements in those. There are other types of foods, particularly whole grains and seafoods, a major source of fatty acids. Some countries like Southeast Asia, you see an increase. Other countries below that are dropping. They're below the line. They're declining, right? So we can't assume that poverty reduction, improved literacy and education, improved services are automatically going to improve our diets. Quite the contrary. In some cases, you have to act. Now, trans fats, one of the big bad ingredients of recent years, has been reduced usually through policies encouraging or imposing on industry to say, take this out of my diet. And you're seeing a decline in trans fat intake pretty much around the world. But you're also at the same time seeing a large increase in processed meats, which is one of the major contributors to a lot of the diet-related diseases. So we have to understand the composition, not just the diet diversity, not just the food consumption scores, not just minimum diets. We actually have to understand what diets are in many countries, and right now we have very little information on who's actually eating what. And we need to understand the quality implications. Now, some of Derek Heddy's ongoing work, really important in understanding relative prices. Part of the story is of course, what we see is an increase to the right-hand side of that diagram. In these 5 countries over those decades, increasing relative price of staples, but particularly the red lines, fruits and veg, right? It's really important to understand relative prices, price elasticities, and of course not just prices, non-price drivers of choice. But at the same time as increased relative price of fruits and veg, what are we seeing? Well, a relative decline in the price of things like chocolates and snacks and ready meals and potted noodles and, wow, ice cream. Relative prices matter because they affect choice, and where choice is impaired, whether it's by information or purchasing power or accessibility, then the choice of what to eat can be quite significant. So this study from Miller just last year, if you actually reached 5 a day, which is now considered really a bare minimum, 5 a day fruits and veg, it would cost most households in these countries more than half of their total income. That's a problem, right? Because in countries where households are spending 70% maybe of their total income on food, there isn't a whole lot left for education, for healthcare and beyond. Our very own Jerry Shively did this calculation for Uganda, markets in Uganda, looking at the cost in various prices, that's the various lines, all different markets in Uganda, against the poverty line at $1.25 a day, in relation to the least cost minimum diet. And what you can see is that it doesn't matter where you are in Uganda or what year you're in, most people who are below the poverty line cannot afford a minimum nutritionally adequate diet. So we have to understand all of these linkages. What is agriculture producing and why? What are the incentives and disincentives for growing more fruits and vegetables? For the private sector to not reduce the price on ice cream. Darn it. And how do markets function, distribute these foods around a country? And what do we do to encourage a change so that by 2030, the outcome is very different than it could be today? So the global panel makes a call to action, and there are many more points, but the key points that I think resonate based on what we've been discussing is bring food system-wide policies, not just agriculture policy, not just trade policy, but policies that affect the entire food system. Try and realign those with nutrition goals, making appropriate foods available. If they're not available, then we're not going to be able to access them or eat them. So a first step is encouraging the availability at a decent price of the foods that we know are important to our health, right? It's really a no-brainer. That includes things like having appropriate national dietary guidelines, not focused to the consumer, but focused to the policymaker. If you have dietary guidelines where you tell people, eat 5 fruits and vegetables a day, you and you and you, actually the policymakers need to be able to make that happen, right? It's no good just telling you to go and do it if the policies they're implementing are counter to that goal. Right? So we need to be using whatever tools we can, not just to educate consumers and shift demand. Yes, we do need to do that. But we need to educate policymakers and shift supply. Those two things have to happen in tandem. We need more accountability. We've heard so much these few days about how to measure food security, how to measure diets, what are different metrics. And we need more of that. We need to be able to come to quite quickly greater understanding of what it is that is a healthy diet, how do we measure it, and how do we hold governments accountable for helping consumers reach that healthy diet. Part of that is ag research investments, which are heavily weighted towards staple grains, staple foods, and nearly nothing to the nutrient-rich commodities and foods that we really absolutely want to see. Linked to this Foresight report was a paper in Nature. There were also copies out there. Many of you picked those up. A paper in Nature from last December, which tried to distill a lot of this thinking into 10 top domains for guiding research, particularly the research around food. And I'm not going to go through those 10. I'm just going to say that several of them have been coming up here repeatedly. One of them is we need more data on actual diets. We've been hearing about lots of small surveys, a little bit about national surveys, but globally there are no standardized data sets that allow us to document change over time and disaggregated consumption. What are the metrics we need to define healthy diets, which have some universal aspects, but also will have some local dimensions. We have to understand those dimensions. We've heard a lot about production diversification, and can production diversification improve diet diversification? Some people have been talking about climate change in that context. None of this is static. Climate change is happening. We need to understand that context. And very, very few studies have looked at the entire value chain, the food value chain. There are pieces that look at agriculture to storage, or storage perhaps to sales, and perhaps markets to diet quality. Some of them go from diet quality to nutrition. But connecting those dots in a systematic way is extremely rare. It's extremely challenging too, but it's extremely rare. But we need to know better how value chains are working, or where the entry points are for policy and other kinds of investments, if we're going to be able to make change at a large scale in the countries that require it. So the bottom line messages from the Foresight report are, don't just talk about foods, don't just think about nutrients, it's the quality of our diets that matter. That's the goal. People don't eat nutrients, they have a diet, they make choices. We have to try and influence how those choices are made to improve it. Part of that is food systems. We need system-wide thinking, not just individual siloed investments sector by sector. Nepal is ahead of the game in that, in its multi-sector nutrition planning for nutrition, identifying and funding actions in different parts of the value chain across government that can improve nutrition. That's unusual. Other countries are not yet following suit. And we have to seek out innovations that will enable the consumer to make appropriate choices. We're not dictating, but we do want to enable improved choices to secure improved diets. And with that, I will leave it and thank you. That you can download. If you don't have it, you can download the report on the Global Panel website. And I just want to end by once again thanking all of you for your investment in time and energy and resources in coming together as a community, just as John Kuffour was saying, which needs to drive this agenda forward, especially the students and the young scientists who need to take over the mantle of this kind of research. So thank you.